Hey everyone, it's Time Voyagers here, and look, I know what you're thinking. Another video about war and peace? That's as appealing as a root canal with a rusty spoon. But bear with me, because this isn't just some dry history lesson. 10 years ago we asked, is war coming to an end? In 2014, trends suggested the world was becoming more peaceful. But today, as we see devastating conflicts in Ukraine and the Middle East, has the tide turned? Let's uncover the truth behind the numbers. So, rewind to 2014. The US was pulling out of Afghanistan after a 20-year entanglement, and while nobody was declaring victory, because let's be honest, what were we even fighting for? There was a sense that maybe, just maybe, large-scale wars were on their way out, and then ISIS waltzed in, like that friend who shows up to your party uninvited and starts chugging all your good tequila. Suddenly we were back to square one with a whole new conflict brewing in Iraq and Syria. But hey, there was a glimmer of good news amidst the chaos. Remember the Arab Spring? Yeah, about that. Turns out overthrowing dictators is easier said than done, and some of those revolutions devolved into civil wars faster than you can say power vacuum. Libya and Yemen became prime examples, with ongoing conflicts that seemed to have no end in sight. And just when you thought things couldn't get any messier, along came the Tigray War in Ethiopia. This one flew under the radar for a while, but trust me, it's been an absolute humanitarian disaster with hundreds of thousands dead and millions displaced. Oh, and did I mention the war in Ukraine? Because, you know, Russia decided it was time to relive its glory days by, and I'm quoting Putin here, denazifying a country led by a Jewish president. The irony, it burns. Now, you might be thinking, John, surely these are isolated incidents, right? Well, here's the thing. While the world may have collectively decided that invading another country for its resources is generally frowned upon, except for you, Russia, you get a timeout in the corner, civil wars are still the hot new trend in global conflict. They're like those fidget spinners everyone was obsessed with a few years back. Annoying, disruptive, and seemingly impossible to get rid of. Take the Tigray War, for example. This wasn't just some border skirmish, it was a full-blown internal conflict that claimed over 500,000 lives, most of them civilians. And the worst part? It was largely ignored by the international community because, hey, who needs to pay attention to a humanitarian crisis when there are Twitter feuds to be had, right? But Tigray is just one example. From Syria to Myanmar to Yemen, civil wars are raging across the globe, fueled by ethnic tensions, political instability, and good old-fashioned greed. And these aren't just small-scale skirmishes. We're talking years-long conflicts that displace millions, destabilize entire regions, and create breeding grounds for extremism. But let's get back to Russia for a second, shall we? Because their little special military operation in Ukraine isn't just another civil war. It's a blast from the not-so-distant past. See, after World War II, the world collectively decided that invading a sovereign nation and just straight-up annexing its territory was, how shall I put this delicately, a dick move. But apparently nobody sent Putin the memo, because in 2022 he decided to dust off the old playbook and see if anyone noticed. And notice, they did. The invasion of Ukraine wasn't just a tragedy for the Ukrainian people. It was a wake-up call for the rest of the world. It showed us that despite decades of relative peace, the old rules of warfare, the ones where might makes right and international law is treated like a suggestion box, haven't gone anywhere. The war in Ukraine is a stark reminder that even in the 21st century, territorial ambition, fueled by nationalism and historical grievances, can still rear its ugly head. And while the outcome of this conflict is still uncertain, one thing is clear: the world will never be the same. Chapter 4, Democratic Peace Theory, more like democratic-ish, right? Now, for a brief moment of optimism, don't worry, it won't last long, let's talk about democracies. Remember that whole democracies don't go to war with each other thing? Yeah, that's still mostly true. It's like the international relations equivalent of that friend who always brings a veggie platter to parties. A little boring, maybe, but ultimately harmless. But here's the catch: while democracies might not be duking it out on the battlefield, they're not exactly playing nice in the sandbox either. Take India and China, for example. They've been locked in a tense border dispute for decades, and while they haven't resorted to all-out war yet, things have gotten pretty heated at times. And then there's Taiwan. which China seems to think is just a rogue province that needs to be brought back into the fold, by force if necessary. So, while the idea that democracies are inherently more peaceful might hold some water, it's important to remember that even the most enlightened nations have their limits, and when those limits are tested, well, let's just say things can get messy. Chapter 5. Counting the Cost. A century of carnage and a glimmer of hope? All right, enough with the geopolitical analysis, let's talk numbers. Because when it comes to war and peace, statistics can be surprisingly revealing. Now, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. 2022 was a rough year. In fact, it was the deadliest year for conflict since the Rwandan genocide, with over 200,000 people killed in wars around the world. Depressing, right? Well, hold on, because here's where things get interesting. Despite the horrors of the past decade, the overall trend in global violence is actually downward. That's right, you heard me correctly. While it might not feel like it when you're bombarded with images of war and destruction on a daily basis, the world is actually more peaceful now than it has been for much of human history. How is that possible, you ask? Well, for starters, we've gotten a lot better at not killing each other in large numbers. Gone are the days of world wars that claimed tens of millions of lives. And while interstate conflicts still occur, they're far less common and less deadly than they used to be. Chapter 6. The Future of Conflict. A multipolar world, a rearming Europe, and a rising China. So where do we go from here? Is the world destined for endless conflict, or can we break free from the cycle of violence? Well, if I had a crystal ball that could answer that question, I wouldn't be wasting my time making YouTube videos, now would I? But I can offer some insights based on current trends. First off, the unipolar world order, where the US called the shots and everyone else fell in line, is over. We're entering a multipolar world with China flexing its muscles on the global stage, Russia throwing a temper tantrum over its lost empire, and regional powers like Iran and Turkey vying for influence. This diffusion of power could lead to a more unstable world as countries jostle for position and old alliances crumble. Secondly, Europe, which has enjoyed relative peace and stability for decades, is rearming at an alarming rate. The war in Ukraine has shattered the illusion of perpetual peace, and European nations are now scrambling to beef up their defences, fearing that Russia might have expansionist ambitions beyond Ukraine. And then there's China, the elephant in the room. China's economic and military rise has been nothing short of meteoric, and it's clear that they intend to play a major role in shaping the future world order. Whether that role will be a force for peace or conflict remains to be seen. Outro the world in 2034, peace or peril. So there you have it, the world stands at a crossroads. Will we return to peace, or will violence escalate further? Let's hope for a brighter future as we move toward 2034. What do you think? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into global trends. Together, we can better understand the world.